Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. Today is part two of this initial exploration that we've been doing on burnout. In the first episode, I described a model of burnout that's called the demand control support model. And in that first episode, we explored life's demands. As I'd mentioned, the model was created by Robert Karasek in the 70s, and the model suggests that work related stress, and again, work is whatever you're called to do in that day, is influenced by the demands of the work and the demands of that work environment and the control you have over that work. So the higher the demands, the less the control, the more stressful the work is. The model also says that social support, so support from colleagues, managers, friends, family, can act as a buffer against work stress. So, along with social support, though, in my version of the model, I add in the support and coping skills we can use, even those ones you might use by yourself, that buffer the impacts of those demands, right? Things like self-care. And on the last episode, we talked about strategies to manage the demands of life. And today we're talking control. Cue Janet Jackson. This is one of my favorite concepts. But for today, I am intentionally changing the name of the model. So instead of using the word control, I'm going to replace it with the word choice. And we're going to dig into why that is as well. So I am so glad you've joined us, and let's jump in.
Now available. You deserve to love your job. How to find your purpose and enjoy your life. You may not have learned this growing up, but you deserve to love your job. You will spend more time at work than in any other activity in your life, and you deserve to love it. Research tells us that people who love their work are twice as likely to enjoy their life. This book will help you create a blueprint to help you fulfill your purpose, love your job, and live the life you were designed to live. Now available at Amazon.
So let's talk about choices, right? The model would say that the more choices we have over our work, the less stressful that work is going to be. And sometimes that's described as decision latitude or autonomy. That means that to the extent to which we can make decisions about our work, we're going to find that work less stressful. And in his research, Karasek found that people whose jobs were low in decision latitude or autonomy, meaning those who had the fewest choices about how they got their work done, felt more tired at the end of the day, had trouble getting up in the morning, and just generally experienced higher levels of depression and anxiety. And the more latitude or choices they had, the less stress they experienced. So according to the model, when your role is really high in demands, but you have little or no decision latitude, the result is a very high strain job. By contrast, you may have a job that's high in demands, but if that is matched with a high decision latitude or a lot of autonomy, the result is what he called an active role, which also means lower stress and higher job satisfaction. And this wasn't in his model, but research has told us since then, and I think our experience has as well, that too many decisions, too many choices can also be stressful. Just the act of having to make so many choices can cause a level of mental fatigue. Sometimes it's called decision fatigue. And being a business owner and spending time with other business owners and just leaders in general, I would add that having a very high level of choice can also mean high strain, high stress. So, one thing I've shared with people who want to start businesses, especially if you're starting it on your own, is that you have to either be comfortable or become really comfortable with having a lot of choices and making a lot of decisions. I mean, I remember being kind of year 2 or 3 in this business and thinking, oh my gosh, I wish someone would just tell me what to do. Like, I just don't want to make any more decisions. I wish someone would give me some performance objectives, just tell me what I need to get done for the year. And I've heard that from other people who work in, either owning their own business or in just jobs where you have a ton of choice over your work and how it gets done. That much choice can actually be overwhelming. And I found that some people who were business owners or even in jobs that had a lot of autonomy left those jobs or left that business ownership because they just preferred to work in a role that required fewer decisions and had a more kind of defined scope of work. So, really, the question to consider from the choice perspective is, can I make more, less, or different choices that positively contribute to the level of stress I experience in my work? And I realize, right now that might be a bit conceptual or not very practical at the moment, but we're going to drop into it and also, talk about it a bit more and also make sure you have some practical examples. So I want to first talk about the difference between control and choice and why I'm using choice instead of control in this model, in my renamed version of this model. First, let me read a quote from Dr. Reese Johnson. And it said this, I heard this in a webinar: control is a myth. All you have is choice. Control is a myth. All you have is choice. And Dr. Reese is a therapist. She focuses a lot on nutrition and eating. She's an amazing public speaker, very motivational. You can find her on Instagram at dr.charisse, CHARRYSE_J. So it's Charisse Johnson, but she's often known by Dr. Reese. And life, the Holy Spirit have just taught me how accurate this is. We don't control a lot. We can make good choices. We can be intentional. We may have some level of power, but we rarely have what I would call control. We don't even know what the next day might bring. We don't even know what the next moment might bring. So we have some power, we have some influence, but the word control speaks to a level of just influence that as spiritual beings living in this human experience, which is unpredictable and hard to explain sometimes, we just don't have control. One definition of the word control that I found is to regulate. And control sounds like we're able to determine the outcome of something, which is so rare because, as you all know, there's so many circumstances in life, at work, that are, in play at any moment, that typically the most we can do is influence the outcome, not determine it. And so I like to reflect that as daily choices, thinking about it as the choices I can make versus what I can control. And doing that is really helping me personally to let go of the need to control my circumstances, the people around me. I mean, I'm definitely a work in progress, so those who know me well, hopefully you've seen some changes, but over the years, I've been focusing on this, like focusing on choice rather than control, and it has really helped. So the real question is, what choices are we making today, not what we can control? And you know that even when you don't make a choice, it's still a choice, right? Doing nothing is a choice. It may not be an intentional choice. It may not be an assertive choice, but it is a choice. And it just reminds me of the quote my mom used to always say: life is about choices. And that is so true. Sometimes as goal-oriented people, we focus on the outcome more so than the process. And many of us have been taught even to start with the end in mind. That's one of those Covey principles, and it's a great one. I do it regularly, and I think it's a really good practice, but I may start with the end in mind. And at the same time, I have to realize that the end may not look like what I thought it would at all, right? It may not come in the timing I thought it would come. It may not look the way I thought it would look. It may not produce the results I thought it would produce. Sometimes it might be better, more results, sometimes less. And why? Because I'm not in control of all of life's circumstances. So, I still start with the end in mind, but one of my favorite quotes from Quincy Jones is that he said whenever he went in to produce, he would produce it to about the 80% level and not to 100, because he liked to leave room for God to walk into the room. So the idea is like, yeah, I'm going to do what I can, but I'm also recognizing that I'm not going to probably, and also I don't want to fully control the outcome of this. And it kind of falls in line with, like, one of the best pieces of relationship advice I ever received was allow the other person to surprise you, right? So don't try to control every turn on the road, every exit, every get on. Instead, focus on what you actually can control the most, which is your daily choices, and allow life to surprise you. And by the way, life is a lot more fun that way. And it's also a lot less stressful. So throughout the rest of this time we talk about this model, you'll hear me use the word choice instead of control. So I've renamed it the demand choice support model. And so that's what we're going to talk about. But before we get into some of the strategies that you can use, the choices you can make about your work, I want us to ask ourselves, are we using all the power that we have to make all those choices in our work context? And I'll encourage you to think about that now and throughout this discussion. In my book, You Deserve to Love Your Job, I shared that I know so many people that have a problem with the word power. So many of us have seen power misused by others or overused that we think the concept in general is one to be avoided. But power is neutral, right? It's how you use it that matters. Some of the people that made some of the most positive impacts and changes in the world had power. Martin Luther King had power. Gandhi had power. Ida B. Wells had power. Your most positive role models, your teachers, leaders in your life that helped you or role modeled the way, they all had power. So there's nothing wrong with power. It's really about how you use it. But sometimes, because so many of us have had, terrible experiences with people who overuse their power or try to use it to control us or the situation, that many of us just avoid our power altogether. So in the book, there's a quiz that you can take to understand if you are using the power that you have, and if you're not, what might be getting in the way of that. And one reason I talk about in the book is that choice and honestly just change in general, choice, change, decision making is kind of my jam, right? It's the thing I lean into, especially during times of stress, thinking about what can I change? What can I do to make this better? Um, in the next episode on this, we'll talk about why that's not always good, but pause for now is the thing I lean into. Um, and it's also the thing sometimes I have to step back from, especially when it comes to situations that involve other people or when it's a situation I really just can't change. But when I've leaned into choice, when I've leaned into change, and it's worked positively, and it's helped me manage my stress better and kind of buffer me from burnout, I want to share some of the things I've done and some of the things that you can consider. And some of these choices, changes, remember in this model, these are all about changing or, changing how we do the work. It's not about changing what work it is or even the amount of work. That's really in demands. Instead, this is really making choices that change how your work gets done. So there are 5 strategies I want you to consider, 5 choices. And the first one is schedule, which is about when your work happens. So, based on my life, I've done a lot of different work schedules based on my life, my husband's work schedule, my daughter's work, just other things I had responsibility for. I've done a lot of different work schedules. I've done the early in, early out method, which worked great in some jobs, but not in all of others, because if your team is a late in, late out group, it can be hard to do the early in, early out, or at least I found so. I've adjusted start and stop times, especially the times I was in the office specifically, so that they better, worked for my work and life. And sometimes being there when no one else is there can be awesome, right? Because you get so much done. I remember I had one friend of mine, we worked together, and he arrived every day at like 5 in the morning. And he was really disciplined in his approach. He worked out, he read, he did a devotional, and then he still had like 1 to 2 hours of undisturbed work time to get things done before the rest of us were even rolling in the door. So if you can adjust your schedule, do so in a way that makes sense for the work you have to do and for your life, right? I'm personally not what I would consider to be an early riser. I'm usually up before 7, but I'm not a 4 or 5 a.m. person. But there have been times for certain jobs or certain times in my life. I had one job that started with a 8 a.m. team meeting on Mondays. And so to get there, one on time, but also to prepare to get a few things done before I was going to be in a 2-hour meeting, it just made sense for me to get there a lot earlier. I didn't always do it, but I endeavored to do it. So think thoughtfully about what makes sense for your work. And to the extent you can adjust your schedule, do so. because that can alleviate a, significant portion of stress. If you have to pick up a child in the evening or other responsibilities you might have morning or evening. Some people do their workouts in the morning because then they're not worried about trying to leave at a certain time. Like, be intentional about how you manage your work schedule, because doing so can really make an impact on the level of stress you feel in your work. Strategy two. Okay. Some of us can choose our work location, which is where we do the work. So, where do you get your best work done? Perhaps you have the option to work from home, but even if you don't, there are location choices you can make. I remember times when two times come to mind. One, I remember a time when I had a team and it just was really busy at work. And so I would book a conference room for a couple hours, like on a different floor, because I knew I had a team that needed a lot. We were working in a kind of open concept. And so I just couldn't get work done because people were stopping in, or I'm hearing conversations around me and I'm entering into them because I'm distracted. I can easily tune out noise in a coffee shop because I don't have anything to do with those people around me. But when people are talking about the work of our team, it was harder to tune out. So I would, book a conference room on another floor, a couple hours just to get work done. So that I was, doing it in a location that made sense for the work I was trying to do. The other thing I thought about is at one time, me and two other colleagues of mine were working on a paper. It was a book chapter. And we were working a job that had nothing, I mean, it was related to the book chapter, but the job wasn't paying us to do this book chapter. This was work we were doing in addition to kind of the work of our jobs. And we would often meet at a bookstore that had a big table, and we would meet there because it just was so hard in a work environment to get work done, like reading. It's almost like if you're trying to do school, in a work environment, it's very hard to do so. So think about your work location, and that could even be the surroundings in your office, your home, your car, wherever it is that you're working. I usually work at home and sometimes from our living area downstairs. And in our living area, we have like really great windows to our backyard, which I love. And just opening the windows every day, spending some time working from, our kitchen table or our living area makes me happier. It boosts my energy. So whether you're thinking about choosing the location or it's about making your current location more comfortable, maybe more organized, better lighting. I don't know if you all can tell, but I recently added a standing desk, which I'm using right now. So it allows me to sit and work, but also allows me to stand and work, which is kind of like working from a different location because I'm doing it from a standing position. And all of those things can really affect our energy, how we feel about the work we're doing. And so, because of that, it can also affect our work stress. So, make a choice and think about where you are doing your work. The third choice you might make in your work is choosing to offer your point of view about how the work gets done. One way that we can influence our work and how much stress there is in that work is doing it in a way that makes sense to us. And sometimes we might have a manager or people above us or peers that have very definitive perspectives about how work should be done. You know, um, have you worked for a micromanager before? I have. And it can be difficult because you don't really feel like you have the autonomy that you want over your work or how it's done. But there are a lot of strategies for working with micromanagers. And a lot of it is about us being willing to use our voice, use and share our point of view, and speak up for what we think is right. I do a lot of leader coaching, and most leaders don't go to work to micromanage and ruin their team members' day. It's actually, I feel like a trigger word for a lot of leaders. If the team members say, "Oh, I think, she's a micromanager," the leader almost is like, "Oh, that's the last thing I want to be." So I'm not saying they don't do those things, but I am saying it's not most of their intentions. I really believe that. And I've heard a lot of people say, my manager's a really nice person, but they're a terrible manager. And there's some research that could support that. There are a lot of managers who just haven't developed leadership skills yet, right? Leadership is tough. It's not easy. It requires a skill set. It requires emotional awareness, relationship skills. It's very challenging. But if we don't watch it, we can really take on the victim role in the story we tell ourselves, instead of really thinking about and speaking up on how you think the work should be done, what support you might need from your manager, what autonomy you might need from your manager. Instead, a lot of times we just complain. So when we hear ourselves complaining more than we're advocating for what we think is right, that might be an opportunity to make a different choice. We can make it less about assessing a manager's skill and more about assessing our own abilities to navigate those dynamics. Our own ability to be assertive and to manage up well. And when you do that, that changes the energy because now I'm not a victim. I'm an actor in my story. I'm accountable for my story. And there's absolutely research that supports that we tend to feel less stress when we're taking action towards making something better versus just complaining or kind of situating ourselves as the victim in our story. So, what does that mean? Basically, I want to talk a little bit about the victim versus actor. So, I'm going to describe a situation about what's going on. And I want you to tell me if you think I would be, or someone would be putting themselves in the victim role or the actor role, right? Because when I'm not in the actor role, I'm typically also not owning the situation. I'm not taking accountability for what is. I'm really making someone else the star of the story, talking about what they're doing, and then portraying myself as the victim of that story. So let's do a little, I'll share a couple things and you decide, is that a victim story or an actor story? Okay, first, this traffic is terrible and it is always making me late to work. Victim or actor? Right. Okay, I hope you chose victim. Second version, this traffic is terrible. I'm going to have to leave earlier, go a different way, or figure something out so I'm not late to work. Actor, right? So, yeah, the traffic is still terrible. That doesn't change. If the traffic's terrible, it's terrible. But what am I going to do about it? Am I going to complain about it? Am I going to, you know, blame the traffic for whatever the outcomes are in my life? No, I'm going to choose the actor role. Here's another one. This traffic is terrible. I really should have left earlier. I better pick up some donuts before I head into this meeting. I'd say actor, right? Yes, the traffic's still terrible, but I'm owning I should have left earlier. And that it just reminded me of that commercial, where they say, don't be late, be the one who, don't be the person late to the meeting, be the person that shows up with donuts. Okay, at least I'm doing something to make it better. Okay, one more. This traffic is terrible. I need to let the meeting organizer know that I won't be able to get here before 8:30. Victim or actor? I still call that actor. Yes, the traffic's terrible, but if I can't get there on time because maybe I'm dropping off at a certain time or whatever reason, maybe I just need to tell someone that's the way it is. And maybe they can move the meeting. Maybe they can do something to adjust. Maybe you can join via phone on your way in, but there may be other solutions. But nonetheless, I'm still taking accountability and taking action for what is happening, right? Okay, we'll do one more kind of scenario. So again, say, is this a victim or an actor? First one, my manager is terrible. She always has these last minute requests that keep me from getting home on time. She is really messing up the time with my family. Victim, right? Manager's terrible. That may be true or not. I don't know. But the last minute requests are getting in the way of me getting home on time. They're messing up my time and my family. That's a victim. Okay, last one. My manager has a lot of last minute requests. I may need to talk to her earlier in the day to see what's important so I can get it done before I need to leave. Actor, right? Yes, someone may come around with a lot of last minute requests, but maybe you go talk to them 2 to 3 hours before the end of the day to say, hey, I'm wrapping up. Is there anything top of mind, anything I need to work on before I leave at 4, 6, whatever it is? Kind of reminding them of what it is and telling them, figuring out what they need. So, you know, if my manager is the problem, a lot of times that focuses us on changing that person, changing my manager, and good luck with that. It's probably about as easy to change a manager as it is to change anyone else in our lives, which we all know is not very easy. But it's really easy to fall into this victim mindset, this victim story. I was text whining a friend of mine. I call it text whining because I tend to do that when I get overwhelmed or frustrated. I text a friend with my sob story, talking about an office space. I was thinking of purchasing, etc. And she was giving me all these ideas for how I could go about it or how I could, get what I needed differently so I wasn't spending this money. But I wasn't focusing on the choices I had. I was really focusing on how I felt in that moment and kind of situating myself as a victim. So I'm telling you, it's really easy to drop into it. So what we can do is be really aware of the stories we're telling ourselves about our work, about the way that work is done, and then challenging ourselves to say, you know what, if I wasn't a victim in this story, if I was being an actor in this story, what could I do differently that might positively impact my work and the level of stress that I feel? A related choice you can make is about why you do the work, which is about the mindset we bring to the work. So, what's our purpose for being there? What is the story we're telling ourselves about that? This is really another place to consider if we are showing up as a victim or an actor in our story. So, quick example, I knew someone who was working in a grocery store and really just didn't like it, right? Said it was boring, didn't like showing up every day. And just so happened I was in that same grocery store one day picking up some food in the deli line. And the person helping me was just the most joyful person I'd been around in a long time. And we were probably similar ages and we were just having this great conversation because I was getting a lot of stuff and a lot of food. And I remember telling him, thank you so much for like being so helpful and being so pleasant. It was a really difficult day as well. So, him just being so pleasant and helpful was so meaningful. Because I was ordering all this food unexpectedly. And when I said that to him, he just told me how thankful he was to have a job. This job allowed him to provide for his family, like that every day we're here is a blessing. And I was just blown away by his attitude, his mindset about working. And it was just a reminder to me that we choose our perspective on our work, right? So the question is, how do you describe the work that you are doing? Whether that's going to a job, caring for a loved one, parenting, how do you describe it? And do you want to choose a different description? One that highlights really the highest purpose of the work that you're doing. Are we describing it from its highest purpose, or are we kind of flippantly going along with the narrative of others about, oh, this job is terrible. They're working me like a dog. I mean, we can easily just kind of easily drop into the negative side and be our most negative selves about the work. And that has an impact on us, right? So I'm not for toxic positivity, telling ourselves something is great when it's not. But I am for finding the best in a situation. The Bible says whatever's excellent, praiseworthy, if there be anything good, think on these things. So we have a choice about the mindset we bring to the work. And that mindset can impact how we think about the challenges, how we feel about the challenges, and how much stress we feel as a part of that work. And I couldn't end without mentioning this last choice, which in some ways may be the most important, which is about who we're working with, right? I mentioned I think about work in a broad context, meaning it's not just your job per se, but all the work you're called to do in a day, a week, a month, a year. So work shows up in lots of ways. It can show up in housework, jobs, businesses, parenting, community groups. There's tons of ways that we work every day. So if I start at the base level of who, if you have a choice about who you're in partnership with, whether that is a marriage, dating, a business partnership, co-lead on a board, the extent to which you all are aligned on the same page, communicate and get along well, of good character, is going to make a huge difference in the level of stress that you will experience. So we need to use the choices we have and make those who choices when we have them really, really well. I remember in her first book, Lean In, a lot of you all may have read that by Sheryl Sandberg. She's a technology executive. She was the COO of Facebook for years. She mentioned that one of the best career decisions she ever made was selecting her husband as her partner. God rest his soul, because he has since passed. But I understood completely what she meant, because who you select as a partner in the work of life and how that person supports you or not in your job, your work, and any other thing you want to do is critical. So when you have a choice over partnerships, jobs, or elsewhere, make the very best decision that you can because who that person is going to have an impact on your stress level. I was at, I think maybe it was a marriage conference or a sermon. Anyway, I heard a pastor say this, and I know it's true for me. Someone asked him, what's your secret to the success of your marriage? And I remember him saying, most people say the most important thing about a marriage is, what would you all guess? Communication. And he said he agreed that communication was very important, but that the most important thing about the success of his marriage and his marriage working was the person he married. And I thought, bingo. I mean, I tell my daughter and her friends all the time, find a partner who's nice and kind, of good character, hard worker. Those things are going to trump your communication skills, quote unquote. And it's going to influence the kind of skills someone's willing to develop over time. And that is true in other partnerships as well. At work, even, they have the saying, and they've done some research on this as well. Sometimes true, sometimes not, depending on the organization. But the saying is people don't leave a job, they leave their manager. And when we have a choice about who we're working for, we should be clear about the people we're working for. And when you have an opportunity to make a choice about that decision, don't take it lightly. It's not that we're always supposed to work for the nicest person or, the person we know the best, but be intentional about it, pray about it, think about it. If you have a choice, make it well. Because I realized the other day that at both of the organizations where I worked for, a pretty long period of time, one person at each organization was really influential in every promotion that I received in those organizations. One person. Not that they controlled them or decided them all, but they were pretty influential. So who you work for and who you work with makes a difference. Think about how much you've learned from certain people that you've had a chance to work with, right? When you have the chance to work with someone amazing, take it. I realize that's not always possible to have that choice, but when it is, let's make sure we take advantage of it. So the choices we talked about fall into the 5 big questions, right? When are we going to work? Where are we going to do our work? How are we going to go about that work? Why are we working? What's the mindset we bring to it? And who is it that we're working with? It's like the core questions of journalism, right? And you can also make them the core questions about how you can adapt your work, make different choices, create a more enjoyable, less stressful work environment, which can keep you out of burnout and also can help you recover from it. So thank you all so much for joining. This was part 2, actually in a 3-part series that I'm going to do on this burnout model. When I first started talking about it, I thought it was going to be 1 episode, and then I thought 2 episodes. And then as I got into just the choice part of the model, I decided, no, this is actually 3. So in the 3rd episode, we're going to talk about the support component of the model, which is what kind of coping strategies, self-care, support from others, like what can we do to mediate the impact of burnout and mediate the impact of stress on our lives. So that's going to be the next episode, which is episode 3. So thank you all so much for joining. Drop me an email. Let me know what's going on with you as it relates to stress, work, and burnout. Think about, how can you make more or different choices that positively impact your stress? And I'm always curious on what strategies you have used or are using. And if you're not in my email group, you must be. There's a link to join the crew in the show notes, or you can join via a QR code that's at the end of this video on YouTube. And as always, you can find me on Instagram at Arlene_pace_green. And if no one has told you today, I love you. I am so, so proud of you. You are killing it. And as I said, we're going to keep killing it while not killing ourselves in the process. I love you and be well.